Microsoft Azure. My name is Rachel. I'm from Coding Black Females. I am one of the community leads there and also the operations manager. I also support with like some boot camps as well. So I'm very familiar with like students and the struggles that they go through learning new technical subjects as well. Yeah, Coding Black Females was founded by Charlene back in 2017 when she was at uni, and when she went into work as a software developer, she found that there weren't many Black women in tech who looked like her or there at all, essentially. So she decided to put together Coding Black Females in order to create some sense of community. And that's kind of evolved and snowballed into something so much bigger than she ever expected it to be. And I'm glad to be able to support her on that. But not to waste too much time, I'm happy to hand over to Johan, and we can get into the evening.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if it's on.
Yes, it is on.
Is it on now?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Good evening, afternoon. I'm not sure if everyone is in the same time zone here, but a good afternoon. My name is Johan. I'm a Microsoft technical trainer with Microsoft here in the UK. You can probably hear from my accent that I'm not from here. I'm actually from South Africa, so I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction here. It's just a sort of intro slide to me. Probably just to make you feel a little bit more sort of comfortable with the person standing here today. I only immigrated to the UK last year in January, so I've been here for about a year now, which is probably why I was here an hour and a half early. I'm not really too familiar with all these trains and things. But yes, it's not my first role at Microsoft. I've been in this role now for about three years and about a month or so. Prior to that, I was a cloud solution architect for Microsoft in South Africa, where I assisted our customers in building, validating, and designing cloud solutions. So I come with some experience at least. And I'm quite passionate about people and sharing knowledge. This is a core part of what I do. At this point in time, it's all I do really for Microsoft. I train people and I train our top customers. So I'm very happy to be with you today to start this first of 3 sessions. It's going to be this session today, which is going to be a broad introduction to Azure. Then we're going to have another session soon. I'm not sure about dates, but there's going to be a broad introduction to AI, and then there's going to be an introduction to Azure DevOps, right? Which is going to be the 3rd session. So lots of technical content coming up. I also have some experience in a whole bunch of other areas in Azure as well. I'm also an IoT developer. I also this week actually I'm doing a Azure DevOps course with some of our customers. So administrators, they are, you know, I've got at least a wide range of experience on the Azure platform. So you're probably in good hands, I'm hoping, and I'm hoping that you can learn as much as possible. That said, I certainly don't know everything. So if I don't know the answer to one of your questions, I'll go dig it out. I don't mind doing that. I would love to do that. But please, if you have questions, don't feel shy to sort of stick up your hand, ask me a question. We will field the question on the fly. I'm not expecting everyone to kind of wait until the end so that we can, you know, field the questions at the end. I will probably finish around 15 minutes early today so that if there are any questions, then we can have a conversation around those. So welcome, and I hope you learn quite a bit. I've also added my email address on there. If you have any sort of questions, I cannot guarantee that I'll be able to get to you, sort of reply within a certain SLA of sorts, but I will reply at some point in time. Of course, if I'm busy training, I'm training for most of the day, so I probably won't get to my email until the evening. But if you do have a question, if you do have comments or anything like that, please you know, send me an email. I've got my Twitter handle on there as well. At this point in time, I've started doing like an Azure Fundamentals Twitter set of posts. So you might follow me there and check to see if you get any value out of that. Probably it's a little bit more in depth than what I'm covering today. So I've taken the certification exam and all the components that's made up of the certification exam, and I've created almost a tweet of every single one of those. I'm about sort of 15% into that now. So you're more than welcome to follow me there. And also, of course, on LinkedIn, right? If you're interested, connect with me on LinkedIn, aka.ms/Johan, and that'll take you straight to my LinkedIn profile. All right, so enough about me. I enjoy water sports, mountain biking around Epping Forest, and a couple of other things. All right, so talking about Azure, the idea of this session is not for you to walk out of here an expert. I probably won't even call myself an expert, to be brutally honest with you. I'm always wary of people that call themselves experts. But the idea of this session is to create awareness, like a broad awareness of what Azure is, right? And how you can probably leverage it in your specific scenarios, right? So if you've got some virtual machines on premises that you are building applications on, and you want to move some of those workloads into the cloud, we'll talk about virtual machines. If you want to get a little bit more cloud native and you want to run them in PaaS services, we'll talk about PaaS services. If you want to run containerized applications, we'll talk about that. Okay, so there's a broad set of topics I'm going to be covering today. And yeah, again, if there's any questions, let me know. I'll field them as we go. Certain areas I'll probably go a little bit deeper than other areas, but let's wait for that. And then today might be a lot of information for you, right? And if you're new to the platform, it probably will be a lot of information, maybe a little bit too much actually. I've got like probably 3 weeks of course content in my head that's kind of screaming to come out, and I'm going to try to contain that as much as I can. But if I fail to grab your attention this week with regards to the Azure platform, you are more than welcome to scan that image on the board there. And we are starting a 10 Tuesdays event next week, Tuesday, I think, where we will take 10 Tuesdays in a row. We will spend, it's an after hours thing as well, so you don't have to take any of your office hours off. And we are going to piecemeal walk through the Azure certification, the fundamentals certification, all right? And walk through the certification over a 10-week period using that link you see at the bottom there, arco.ms/AZ900 live. And you can also scan that QR code, all right? And it's free. Sorry? I don't think so.
This is the registration link.
Yeah, this is the registration link. She wants to know if that will be on YouTube. It'll also be on YouTube. Thank you. Yeah, so happy for that. All right. I'm hoping that as many of you as possible, not sure where the camera is, which one it is, probably that one. I'm not sure how many of you will be able to register for that, but please, if you wanna get the certification, get on that link and register for that link. There's no cost involved, and it'll probably be beneficial. Yes, ma'am. I think because they are on YouTube, you'll be able to check it out on YouTube. Okay. Are there any questions before we start digging in here? Anything really? I've got questions. No, I'm really just kidding. All right. So I'm happy that we can do this, and I'm gonna get straight into this, right? So one of the questions you might have is why cloud? So can I maybe just see by a show of hands, who of you are not developing for cloud today? Who of you are developing for on-prem? You don't have to be shy. It's all good. There's more complex solutions running on premises nowadays than in the cloud. I'm pretty sure of that. If you look at what banks and stuff are doing. All right. So sort of 10% of you, I guess. All right. Can I maybe ask a question? And I've got some questions. Is there certain things that have stopped you from moving to the cloud? Can you name them? Cost. Okay. All right. Okay. So cost, definitely one of the issues. Yeah. Anything else? Legacy systems. Yeah. I'm with that. So it might be that your architecture, I'll be with you in a second. It might be that your architecture is of such a nature that it doesn't really fit into the cloud, right? Space issues, compliance issues, whatever that might be, right? So there might be lots of issues around that. Sorry, sir, you were saying something? Oh, you mean from a compliance perspective, data residency, that sort of thing? Yeah, for sure, right? So if your client data needs to be within a certain country and Microsoft does not have a data center in that country, you're going to run into compliance issues, right? So you might not be able to store the data in another country. And if our data center is in the country next door, you will not be able to migrate your data there, right? So that's definitely a valid issue. So I'm hoping that we can address some of these issues today and have a proper conversation around that. All right, so why the cloud? First option there is cost, right? Now, I know that the gentleman over there mentioned that cost is stopping them from migrating into the cloud. But if you think about how you provision infrastructure and services and applications on-prem, what you tend to do is you have a big lump sum of money that goes into a solution where you buy hardware, you buy some servers, you buy licenses for software and all sorts of things, and then you kind of build the project, right? And after that, you start using it, and the cost kind of gets written off over time. Very similar to buying a house cash, right? When you're running your services in the cloud, you essentially have the benefit of having mostly a pay-as-you-go model, right? I like to say pay-as-you-grow model, right? Because your footprint in the cloud is probably never going to get smaller. It's probably only going to get bigger, right? You're not going to create less applications. Your applications are likely going to be growing over time, right? So this pay-as-you-go model means that you don't have to fork out a massive amount of cash up front. You can essentially pay a smaller amount, but pay that smaller amount on a monthly basis, right? Very similar to other cloud subscriptions, right? So if you subscribe to other services like LinkedIn Premium or any of those sort of cloud services, you pay a monthly fee. Netflix is a good example. You pay a monthly fee, you get the service. If next month you want to go visit Spain or one of those places, you can switch off your subscription, use that £10 for your vacation if you want to do it like that, and save that cost. It works exactly like that in the cloud, right? So I'm being a little bit facetious now with having a holiday with £10, of course. But the reality is you're paying for what you're using. And if you're not using it, you can switch it off. And that means you're saving that cost. What we also tend to do when we are running, just be mindful of the time here. What we also do when we are running and buying and implementing software on premises is we tend to overspec certain solutions, right? If we need an application server that needs 2 gigs of RAM and 2 virtual CPUs, we are most likely going to ask for 4 gigs of RAM or 8 gigs of RAM, because it's really difficult to go back to the business a year later and say, hey, this hardware doesn't scale, we need more hardware, right? So we tend to overspec a little bit on premises in terms of what we need, and that drives the cost up even more, right? So that we don't later on have to go back and ask for additional money. Doesn't really work like that in the cloud, right? You can do that, but because you can scale your infrastructure almost dynamically in the cloud, it implies that if you're not getting value for money, if you're not getting 70% CPU utilization and you're getting 30% CPU utilization, you're probably wasting money, right? And then you can remove some hardware from your solution, and you can, get proper value for money, right? So the CAPEX versus OPEX thing is quite a big deal. If you are part of a large organization that has a Microsoft Enterprise Agreement, this is something that you'll negotiate with Microsoft every 3 years, and that implies that you say to Microsoft, well, we are planning to use this amount for the next 3 years, and then you also pay that however you pay it. And then after 3 years, we look at what you've spent, you look at what you want to commit for the next 3 years, and you move that forward again for 3 years, right? So there's many ways of actually costing these sort of solutions. Please, if there are questions, let me know. I'm going. So there's a lot for me to cover. The other thing is reach, right? So you will see. Oh, hang on for a second. I must actually do this on this screen. No, don't worry. The other thing is reach. Where's my mouse? There we go. Apologies for that. Whereas if you're working for an organization that's an international company, you probably don't want to provision infrastructure in every country, right? If you're running web apps, for example, it might be that you might want to provision your applications in a central location and get everyone to access those applications over the internet. With something like with Azure and other cloud service providers as well, Because we've got such a massive footprint, I think currently we're in over 60 sort of regions worldwide. This means that we've got that computing processing power very close to where your users are already. And that means that your organization doesn't have to go and build big data centers close to your users, right? We do that and we focus on that, while you can essentially focus on your core business and whatever your organization does. I'm going to talk about some of these a little bit later on. High availability. Microsoft makes sure that we've got an SLA for virtual machines, for example. So if your virtual machine is down for longer than 0.05% in the year, then we will deduct some cost for that. So there's essentially a money-back guarantee on some of that, right? So we make sure that you get that scalability. We make sure if the hardware croaks underneath your virtual machine, we make sure that another piece of hardware can run your virtual machine, and we give you that high availability and failover and disaster recovery, right? It's not something that you need to manage. It's something that we manage. Monitoring is another big thing, and I'm going to end the session today with a monitoring session where we'll go a little bit deeper into monitoring. But because everything inside of the platform is essentially monitored, we can give you alerts when something is down. We can give you alerts when whatever that threshold and criteria of yours are, really, right? So if you want to know if your application server is getting more than 10 requests a minute or a second for that matter, we can go and set certain thresholds, and our monitoring software will alert you to say, hey, this is happening, right? Send an email, pop a message on your phone, send an alert on your phone if you're running the Azure app on your phone, for example. Even on premises, by the way, right? So we've got agents that we can drop on premises on your virtual machines, and we can feed back some of that monitoring data right back into the cloud. So your monitoring solution covers not just cloud solutions and services, but also your on-prem services, right? That you might be running in your own data center, or that you might be running in competitors' data centers, AWS, Google's cloud, etc. I already touched on scale. Sorry, is there a question? Oh, no, sorry. Yeah, I'm excited for questions. I mentioned scale already, right? And I'm talking massive scale here. The sort of scale we are talking about is the sort of scale that keeps something like the OpenAI chat service going at this point in time, right? So we're talking about a huge amount of compute capability that is at your fingertips and that you can provision within a few seconds, right? So we're doing all the donkey work in the background so that it makes your life easier as a developer, as an administrator, as a DevOps engineer, as any sort of those services. Right. So whether we're talking storage, whether we're talking IoT, AI, there's massive scale that we can bring to the party, and that means that your applications don't necessarily have to run under load. It means that the hardware and the infrastructure can cater for that scale that you need at the times when you need it, right? And you'll notice one of the things I also mentioned here is elasticity. Just need to find my cursor here. Elasticity. This is our ability to say, hey, your server is under load right now. We are automatically going to add more computing capability to the server, right? If you've got something like a cluster, for example, where there's 5 or 6 servers in the cluster, we can build the rules that says, if the server is under this sort of load, add some more servers into the cluster. And if that load subsides over time, then remove servers from the cluster. So obviously your costs will go up and down, but so does your compute capability, right? That's what we mean by elasticity. Security is also quite a big deal. Microsoft recently stopped the biggest distributed denial of service attack that we've ever seen worldwide, actually. In China, there was a DDoS attack, and the infrastructure was, I believe, inside the China data center or something like that. And our DDoS software picked it up and stopped that attack from taking our clients down, right? So we are doing a massive amount of work on our side that is part of the platform, whether you are paying for the service or not, that is actually embedded in all the costs that make your applications and services more secure, right? So you've got dedicated engineers in our data centers that are looking after your security, that have got big screens against the wall that tell them, oh, this is a problem in this area, and then they're working on that to actually fix it, right? So you've got a team of people that, of course, you are paying for that in a way, but you've got a team of people that is looking out for your interest, as opposed to, are we missing something? It's all on us, really. And then, of course, it's also integrated, right? Because Microsoft owns the operating system, Windows, of course, and we're also doing lots of work in Linux at this point in time. I think right now we're the biggest contributor to Linux. We're probably only doing that so that we can manage Linux better in our data centers. We've got more Linux running in Azure than we've got Windows. That probably says it all. So we are doing a hell of a lot of work around that to ensure that we've got better sort of grips on the operating system. And alongside Windows and Microsoft 365 and Dynamics 365, there's great integration from the desktop all the way to the server to other sort of services that you might be used to using. SharePoint is, all of these services are online already. And then also some third-party services. We'll talk about that also in more detail later on. And then last but certainly not least, innovation, right? This is, look, if you're working for a large organization, there's a lot you can do, right? And you can build your own data centers, right? But it's likely not your core business to be doing that unless you work for another cloud provider like Microsoft, like Amazon or one of those guys. So this is one of the scenarios that we're doing right now. We're testing this. It's not very new news. It's actually old news. But because most large cities are actually very close to the coast, Microsoft is experimenting with building data centers that is under the ocean, right? Makes sense. You don't have to do a huge amount of cooling. The fact that these things are completely sealed off at a certain amount of pressure implies that there's no dust floating around. If there's no dust, there's less downtime. If there's no people walking around in the data center bumping against racks, spilling coffee, that sort of thing, there's less downtime, right? So this is the sort of thing that we are working on, and this is the sort of R&D that's going into the platform. And this is R&D that it's really expensive for your organization to be doing this. So why not let Microsoft do this? This is sounding like a sales pitch. It's not that. On the right bottom side, you will see something else that we're playing with. And this is not really, again, new technology, but we're testing this in our data centers currently, is using liquid cooling, right? So that the motherboards and the server racks are essentially under a sort of a type of fluid, and that implies we don't have to use lots of electricity for cooling, right? We've got a sort of promise to be carbon neutral by 2030, which is, I think, much quicker than any of the other organizations that we compete with, right? And we're well on track with that. And the reason for that is because we are putting in this sort of R&D into the platform. All right, so you can actually, I will bring up a link a little bit later on where you can go read up on this. Some great stuff to read on. There's some amazing stats that came out of that. Yes?
So if you create a server on Azure, a Windows server, so does it come with the license of Office 365 or?
That's a good question. So the question here is, if I provision a virtual machine on Azure, does it come with a license? Right? And I want to answer that somewhat immediately. I'm going to just crack open a browser here. Let me just think. I'll bring it up for you in a second. I just need to figure out which side it's on, the right-hand side. There we go. I was not sure which side the screen is. So there you can see, this is something that you can use today. It's called the Azure Pricing Calculator, right? So I would like to show you and what the actual answer is here. I don't have anything in there right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for compute here, and you'll see we've got our costing for all of these services. This is why I'm kind of bursting here with information, because if you look at all these services, these are all the compute capabilities. There's networking, right? Load balancers, VPN, network watches, which is like a monitoring tool. You can see there's a whole bunch of storage components, right? So we've got hundreds of services that run inside Azure, and each of them carries this pay-as-you-go model that you say, hey, I want to use that capability, switch it on, it's there immediately, and you can start using it immediately. If you don't like it, you switch it off and delete it, and you stop paying immediately as well, right? So that's what we mean by pay-as-you-go. All right, so if I go for, where the hell is my cursor now? There we go. So if I go for compute here, and I click on virtual machines, so the scenario I'm going to use here is from South Africa, because I'm very familiar with the South African costing model, having grown up there. So you'll notice that if I look here, we are talking about, for that spec of virtual machine, we're talking about $152 per month, right, for that virtual machine. Some of you are probably going, this is crazy expensive. And you're right, it is expensive. Let me show you. So this means this is in West US. I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom here, and I'm going to go with South Africa West, right? South Africa West is actually Cape Town. Cape Town, if you are familiar with South Africa, is one of the most expensive places kind of in the world, actually, right? Even though with your pounds, it's probably peanuts if you think about it. But in South Africa, Cape Town is really expensive. Our economic hub is actually South Africa North, right? That's Johannesburg. That's where most of the capital is in South Africa, in Johannesburg, not in Cape Town. So if I look at the cost of the virtual machines, and let's bump this up a little bit, shall we? Let's go with 1,000 virtual machines, not just one, so we can get some scale here. So there you can see there's this is a Mickey Mouse virtual machine, by the way. We are talking here about 2 virtual CPUs and 8 gigs of RAM. Some of us probably have cell phones here with more capability than that, right? So that's really entry level. That is in Cape Town, $183,000 per month, which is going to make everyone go, I would rather than run my infrastructure on premises, right? Because I can really go nuts with that sort of amount, especially if that's a monthly amount. So check this out. If I was to choose the Windows license there, right, and I change it over to the Linux license, which there's no commercial cost for Linux, it bumps it down to 115,000. That's already like a 40% cost reduction, right? So check this out. I can go back for Windows again, but if I already have a Windows license for my on-premises workload, and I've got 10 servers that I want to migrate into Azure, I can say, but I want the hybrid license benefit, which means we've got to bring your own license. So if you already own the Windows license, you can bring that license, and we will charge you the same cost that we charge you for a Linux workload. Right? I hope that answers your question. On top of that, you'll notice that we've got this sort of dedicated plan options, which implies if you know that you are going to be running this workload for the next 1 year, 3 years, whatever that might be, in Azure, of course, then we will bump X amount of cost off that, and you'll see that brings the cost all the way down to $42,000 a month, right? So to go from $180,000 all the way down to $42,000 is a huge cost savings, right? So as I always like to say, there are ways of doing things, and then there are other ways of doing things, right? So you want to make sure that you deploy your resources in the right way. Otherwise, you might be paying way too much. All right, so you can bring your Windows licenses if you are planning to migrate those virtual machines into the cloud. On top of that, if it is production workloads and you know that you're going to be using them for a year or for 3 years, you can bring this. You can specify that you're going to be using them for the next year or 3, and then we'll give you an additional discount on top of that. Okay, so yeah, that's significant cost savings, right? That's what around sort of 18% or something like that. Okay, so any further questions around costing? We're not all sort of costing, but around these virtual machine costings. I'm not sure if we're going to get questions from there. All right, okay. I was not sure. Okay, cool. So so yeah, that's essentially part of the costing, and this pricing calculator will work really well for anything you want to cost, right? So if you want to see what our storage account's going to cost, use the costing calculator, right? And it'll give you a proper breakdown of what all the costs are. So you'll see that you can specify the support you want. You can go for developer support, and the cost comes down even some more, right? So we've got all sorts of tiers around that as well. Okay, I'll get back to that in a bit. So one of these tubes, it's basically like a little data center on its own, has got 12 racks and 864 servers in that little container. It looks like a large capsule, right? So yeah, they've finished testing on that. They're in phase 2 of that now. So don't be surprised if we are using these things to create more sort of, reefs, because that's something that's actually an issue in the ocean right now. Right, let me just get back here again. I hope this is making sense for everyone and I'm not going too fast or that I'm, boring the hell out of you. Cool. So let's move on a section here, and let's quickly talk. And the reason why I'm pulling up some of these slides is because very specifically the exam will be asking questions around some of these. Now, you're not here for the exam today, not that I'm aware of, but we're not going to be testing you today, of course. It's just informational. But after you attend our 10 Tuesday session from next week, you will probably be really well prepared to go write the exam, right? And this is something that might come up in the exam. So generally in cloud, we've got 3 main sort of types of services. We've got an infrastructure as a service, we've got a platform as a service, and we've got a software as a service component, right? So in broad terms, all our services in Azure can be categorized as one of those types of services, right? What I mean by infrastructure as a service is storage, all the basic sort of stuff, right? Servers, virtual networks, virtual machines, right? All those basic building blocks that make up the eventual solution for your applications, right? So your applications run on top of all of those things. Platform as a service tends to be a little bit more developer orientated and developer focused. And what I mean by that is we will provide you with a platform as a service component, and then you can bring your code and run your code on that platform. And I'll give you some examples of that when I do some demos later on. And then last but not least, we've got software as a service. And with software as a service, Microsoft is taking on even more responsibility, right? So with software as a service, all you have to do is bring your data and give people access, right? Think of things like Microsoft and Office 365, right? You don't choose the operating system that SharePoint and Exchange and those sort of services are going to be running on. We do that. You really just enable the service. So it's almost like a shrink-wrapped sort of service, right? And I'll demo some of that a bit later on as well. Now, as you go up this stack, you will see that the responsibility lies more and more with the cloud provider. This is not just Microsoft. This is any cloud provider, right? We all have, IaaS, PaaS, SaaS type solutions. So as you move into that sort of more cloud native way of running solutions, so Microsoft will take on more responsibility for the infrastructure and the components that make up your application. To give you an idea, if you're running everything on premises, you are responsible for everything, right? From the storage to the networking, to the actual operating system, all the way to the top there to data and access. Whereas if you're running SaaS solutions like Office 365, we are doing all of that, and all you have to do is give your users access to the data. Okay. Please, if there are any questions around this, I'll be more than happy to field a couple of questions. I also don't want to create a very awkward silence, so let me rather move ahead here. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about today, and I know this is like the agenda, half an hour into my talk here. I'm gonna first talk a little bit about the Azure structure, so you have a basic understanding of the sort of structure inside of Azure. I want you to think of an Excel spreadsheet, right? Excel spreadsheet is a file, right? And we call that a workbook. Okay, so an Excel file is a workbook, and the workbook consists of different sheets, and each of the sheets consists of columns and rows, right? That's really just a structure, right? So I want you to think about the first time you used Excel in your life. How did you use it? You probably thought, holy crap, I can put all my data into this thing. And this is a list of my shopping. And you create another sheet, and this is a list of my family, and you put everything. And then you realize, but hang on, if I want to send my shopping stuff to my colleague or whatever the case is, then I have to send them everything. So then you realize, oh, it's better to create multiple files, right? Just like that, we can give you some building blocks and components that will scale your solution. So you don't sit with all your eggs in a single basket inside of Azure, right? And for that, there's essentially a structure inside of Azure. Okay, I'm gonna quickly talk about that structure if it's all the same to you. And this really talks to governance. And the reason why I'm talking about governance here is this structure that I'm talking about also contains our permissions and access, right? So I'm going to quickly draw on the board here. So I want you to think of a hierarchical structure. I hope this works. Can I do this? Hello. All right. So I want you to think of a hierarchical structure. I'm not sure if the people on there can actually see this. Oh. All right. I'll wait for the camera. Okay. So if I've got let's think of the root, right? Under this root, I can actually go and create some structure. My word, the pen's tip is a little bit sort of thin. Right? And I'm going to use another color here. And then under that structure, I might actually create what's known as a subscription. I might have multiple subscriptions, right? I hope everyone can at least roughly see the structure here. And there's one there. And then under that, we've got another component, and this component is called resource. Ooh, this pen is totally stuffed. Let's use red. And then under the subscriptions, we've got what is known as resource groups. Okay? So just like your file system and your folder structure on your operating system, under your OneDrive, on a file share for your business, we give you some building blocks to create some structure so you don't end up with everything in a single area, because that's just not right, you know. Think of the 1,000 virtual machines I was talking about a minute ago. If I had to put all those 1,000 virtual machines in here, I'm going to use a black one now. If I had to put all my 1,000 virtual machines in a single resource group, just from an overall management perspective, that's a nightmare, right? Because it means that if I want to give someone permissions at that level, they're going to have access to all the servers. So then I have to go and give them individual permissions, right? And that granularity will drive an administrator crazy. So what you rather want to do is you want to create a bit of structure. And if you have a bit of structure, then you can end up with your 1,000 virtual machines sort of, as long as you get the idea here, sort of spread out across that structure a little bit. Does that make sense? That's a good question. So these building blocks, the purple side is called management groups. Right? Oopsie. Management groups. I haven't.
Sorry, would you be able to explain it again? Because obviously we were trying to switch the cameras.
I will do that. So you get to build out this structure, and the structure is a hierarchical structure, And then at the top, you've got what we call management groups, and I'll demonstrate this for you in a second. The management groups can be nested up to 6 levels deep. So I can create 6 levels of structure with management groups at the top, and I can then take my subscriptions, and that's the blue color. Subscriptions, and that's only one level. So I cannot have a subscription inside of a subscription, okay? So I can put my subscriptions anywhere in the structure, like there, and I can scatter it all over the place if I wanted to. And then the last option, the red option, is resource groups. Please ignore my writing. I write like a crab. And resource groups, once again, is only one level as well. We cannot nest resource groups. Okay, so when I provision something like a virtual machine or a storage account, anything, it has to be in a resource group. So all your resources that you provision, and we'll talk about some of those resources, web apps, virtual machines, networks, whatever, all those resources needs to be under resource groups. So they will typically hang off the resource groups at the bottom here. Does that make sense? Okay, so even if it doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense, I want you to just remember that there's this massive hierarchical structure that you can control, and this is how businesses do this. Some businesses will have a sales department with lots of apps and services, a marketing department, an IT department, and then they will create, they will create these based on that hierarchical structure of the company org chart. So this might be, the sales organization. This might be the marketing part of the company, right? And each of these have their own subscriptions, and this allows me to do billing back to the business, right? If I've got one subscription, it means I must go and figure out which of the cost was for marketing and which of the cost was for sales. If you're creating a structure like this, it allows you to say, hang on, we are going to bill these guys because there's a subscription for their resources, and we know exactly what they have to pay us if IT is doing like a bill back thing to business. Okay.
So one management group can have more than one subscription?
Absolutely. But because it's a hierarchical structure, the subscription can only be placed in one area at a time. So nothing is stopping me from moving my subscriptions around, but you don't want to do that too often as well. That just lack of planning will allow you to do that. Yes, sir. Correct. Yes. So you can go with tagging. Tagging is exactly built for that. So tagging will allow me to say, even if this was not called sales and that was not called marketing, even if that was just called management group 1, management group 2, no, it won't. No, but we are not going to do that. That's something you have to do. We give you the tools to extract that information. It's up to you to go and bill back. We're not gonna tell you you must bill your IT department this and bill your sales that. Yeah, you can. It's just something that you have to do yourself. You can do that with PowerShell, with the CLI. There's even some graphical tools that allow you to do that. So maybe we must take this offline, but there's definitely ways of achieving that. What the gentleman was talking about with tagging is, I want you to think of tagging, right? In social media, I can tag anything with anything, right? We can do the same here. If I want this structure to be there, but I don't necessarily want the structure to be affecting my costing, or I want to just group things outside of the structure. I can go and add a tag on that virtual machine and a tag on that virtual machine and a tag on that virtual machine. And then I can go and draw a report that says, show me the costing for these three, for everything that's got that tag related. And then our costing will actually tell you, this is what those virtual machines cost. So that's exactly what you're talking about, right? So tagging is a way for you to tag these services across the structure so that your billing or whatever else, the reason why you want to segregate these services can be across the structure, even though they're all in the structure. I hope that makes sense. Yes, ma'am.
Goes down to only one resource group, but then you can have many different services such as the virtual machines, the storage, etc.
Yes and no. So the top level, the management groups can be nested, right? So I can have 6 layers of management groups in one another. So that can be quite deep if you think about it like that. But under the management group, there's going to be one level of subscription. And inside that subscription, there can be multiple resource groups, right? So I cannot put a subscription inside a subscription, but I can place one or more resource groups inside the subscription. So I can further subdivide my subscription into maybe UAT and test or dev or whatever those different, however I want to use the structure. Yes, sir. Yes. Yeah, so we've got an API around billing. So actually you can do exactly what you want around billing. It's just a question of how much you want to put into it. So let's chat about that a bit later on. All right. So hence this slide, right? Governance, a little bit of structure so that you don't have to put all your resources into a single area, and then, it's just a massive list of virtual machines or a massive list of web apps or whatever the case is. Does that make sense? Am I going too fast here? How's the pace? Is the pace all right? I'm going to go with about a 40% nod rate here. 40% of you nod, I'm happy, and I'll move on, right? If only 10% nod, I'll probably re-explain myself. All right, let's move on. So, in fact, I said I'll demo that. First demo of the day, except for the freaking calculator thing. All right, and I'm going to have to sort of move this a little bit to the side here. Where is my mouse? All right, so this is also the wrong. I'm going to go with my other work option. Oh, I must be standing very close to the mic right now. Right, so this is the Azure Portal if you haven't seen this. Well, that isn't the Azure Portal, that's just the login side. This is the Azure Portal if you haven't seen it. Quick sort of tour of the Azure Portal. You will see all your resources on the left-hand side, sort of categorized. Not all your resources, but most of the main ones. I can also tweak this if I wanted to. If I only work with web apps, I can put web apps on there, and I can customize this. Then you will see that there's a search option at the top there, right? That search option is, I use that more than I think anything else I use inside of Azure, right? Because not only will it allow me to search and find the services that I'm looking for, but down to the name of the service. So check this out. So if I type the word app, right? All the different services that have got app anywhere in the word will actually come up on that search. So there you can see, now I can go to app services and it shows me my app services. I've only got one app service at this point in time. If I go back in the top there and I search for VMs or virtual machines, there's also a little bit of AI in there, right? So if we search for VMs, then it will realize I'm searching for virtual machines, and it'll bring up virtual machines there, right? So there you can see there's virtual machines. If I click on virtual machines, I've got a couple of virtual machines running there, right? So this search is extremely powerful. So take a look here. If I go search for a specific resource, I'm just going to copy and paste that and search for that. You will see it even brings back the individual resources that have got the same name. So that search gives me a categorized search, but also gives me an individual resource search. Okay, so it's very powerful. It's, like I said, it's what I use the most. All right, and then at the top there, you will see that there's some additional options. This one here is quite interesting. I'm going to just make it full screen. What we've got here is we've got what's known as a cloud shell, right? So most of us, if you are a Linux developer or a Linux administrator for that matter, you'll probably find that you're using Bash quite a lot. If you are a Windows administrator, you're probably using PowerShell quite a lot. What we've done here is we've given you the option of both of these, right? So you can see there that I can either choose PowerShell or I can choose Bash, and it's actually running as a container in the background. But if I wanted to, I can choose PowerShell here, and I've got most of the tools that you might be used to using as a developer installed here. In fact, I've even got a subset of code in there, so you'll see that I can actually code up files if I really wanted to, right? So without having to use things like VI and all those things that require you to hold your elbow on 3 buttons before you can save a file, that sort of thing. That was in fact a joke. I think I'm the only, it's like, it was very funny in my head before I sort of said it. So let me just see where the quit button is here. Never mind, I don't even see it anymore. I can go and upload files there. I can run Git commands from there if I wanted to. So if I wanted to, I can go and clone a Git repository, right? Hit the tab button, it'll actually go and download. So the storage behind this Cloud Shell account is actually saved and persistent, right? So if I go and clone a GitHub repository there today, and I sign in tomorrow, that GitHub folder will still be there, right? So you can use this Cloud Shell from anywhere, and it's always there, right? And I don't have to authenticate because it's actually built into the browser. So I'm already authenticated in the Cloud Shell when I open up the browser. Okay, so it's a great tool to use if you're thinking of managing a Kubernetes cluster. All the command line tools are in there. Git is in there. Of course, things like ping, all the standard command line tools that you're using today, they're all in there. And if I wanted to, I can just flip it over to Bash, and it will shut down my PowerShell, and it will now give me a Bash shell, right? So now I can go and write Bash shells here if I wanted to, in Bash scripts, right? So very flexible sort of platform. I can upload files in there if I wanted to. I can create folders. It's all saved to a storage account. All right, so that is that Cloud Shell that you see there. And then there's a couple of additional options. If I had access to multiple tenants, and I don't really want to talk about multiple tenants right now, then I can actually, switch directory, and it'll show me a list of all the tenants that I've got access to. So if you are a Microsoft service provider and a Microsoft partner, and you are managing multiple customers, and they each have their own Azure AD tenants, then you can actually use this portal and manage all the environments without having to sign out and sign in again, right? You can give access. They can give you access to your account, which is called a guest account, by the way. All right, so this is the portal, and I'm going to start at the top of the hierarchy there. Let me just check my timing here. I'm going to start at the top of the hierarchy there, and I'm going to search for management groups. There we go. There's management groups. I've got some management groups here. You will see that if I just scroll down a section, there's the root. I spoke about the root at the top there. Okay, thanks. And there's my first subscription. It's called Always On. There's my IT department, and if I expand that, then you'll see that there's dev and there's training, right? So that key is a subscription. The rest of these are actually management groups. So nothing is stopping me from creating another management group and creating some additional structure to match my organizational structure if I wanted to do that. All right, I'm going to cancel that. This is essentially my subscription. And as I cannot remember who it was, as someone said, management groups is just a structure. A subscription is an agreement with Microsoft on how you're going to be paying for certain services. So if you've got 2 subscriptions in your organization, one for all your production workloads and one for all your dev workloads, subscriptions is a great way of segregating those 2, right? So you can see from the subscription, from the dev subscription, exactly what your dev resources are costing you, and you can see from your production subscription exactly what your production workloads are costing you, right? So it's just another mechanism, again, to segregate certain resources on the platform. And then you'll see from there, if I just scroll down a little bit, then there is resource groups. And if I click on resource groups, it'll show me all my resource groups. And there's my always on resource group. I've got most of what I train during the week, I delete at the end of the week. But I've got some services that I just keep on all the time. Like always on, if I click on my always on subscription there, then you will see that there's a whole bunch of different services. There's an IoT hub, I'll demo later on. There's event hubs, there's API connection, IoT hubs, there's app insights, there's a storage account, etc. So all these resources sit under the always on resource group, and that sits under the subscription, and that subscription sits in that management group. Okay. The portal doesn't show this properly in a hierarchical structure. You will see that they try to give you a bit of a breadcrumb at the top there, but it's not very specific, right? It's not going to show you exactly where you are in that structure. It's just at a very high level, sort of management group, whatever the case might be. Okay, so that's the structure inside of Azure, and it's a good time for us to take a break now. All right, any questions before we break for a bit of a coffee or something? Any questions? Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, no, you won't have access. I cannot give you access. But there is also a free Azure account that you can go and create. So we've got a free account that runs over a period of a year. If you just do a search on the internet for free Azure account, and don't be too scared if it prompts you for a credit card, because it will prompt you for a credit card when you sign up for the free account, but it will not change it over to a paying subscription before you tell it to do that. So after the year, your subscription will be over, but we are not just going to flip a switch and start charging your credit card. It doesn't work like that, okay? So register for the free account. I think that'll give you something like $100 worth of credit. Sorry? Yeah, I think it's 30 days or $100 worth of credit. But then the free account, there's some free services that will continue to work even after your credits are finished. Okay. Any further questions? Are you guys finding this valuable at all? Brilliant. Okay, cool. Let's break for a coffee break. I'm not sure how long the break is actually. 10 minutes, and we will continue after that. Oh, sorry, 30 minutes. Gosh. All right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I can do that. I will do that. Could you remind me of that? I think I'll ignore that for now, and I'll just use the whiteboard. Must I switch it off? Okay, but you said I must talk through the stuff here now on there. So if you want to go through it now, do it online. Yeah. This is the break. Oh, I thought you meant that I must go through it now. No, not now. You can if you want, but it's just doing it online because they didn't catch all the facts. Oh, do you want me just to draw that or to talk through it again? If you can talk through it and draw it, if you can, on your laptop, so it's online. Okay, I'm gonna do it now. By the way. Yes, I know. I'm not sure what they want me to do,
It was just this diagram.
but my question is, must I talk through the diagram or must I just draw the diagram?
Yeah, just maybe talk through a little bit on the diagram because I think they missed like the first few.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So essentially, what you got is you got management groups.
They can't see this screen. So just switch.
Of course.
Just drag it. Yeah.
There we go. I thought I was nailing it there. Obviously not. Um, I do need to keep the microphone on there, right?
This is why is it? It's on. It's on.
All right. So essentially, what we've got is we've got like a hierarchical structure. For those of you that are online, we've got a hierarchical structure, and the structure consists of management groups that can be nested up to 6 levels, and then we've got subscriptions underneath that, and then we've got resource groups underneath those subscriptions, right? So subscriptions cannot be nested. Resource groups cannot be nested. It's only the management groups that can be nested up to 6 levels. So you use the structure to build some sort of a structure in your Azure environment so that your environment scales. So you don't have to put all your resources in a single resource group, like all your eggs into one basket type thing. I hope that makes sense. All right. We're about to start again. I will go and wave them back. What's the time here? 7 o'clock. Okay, so I've got about 45 minutes left now. Okay, thank you.
So, do you have any like tips for learning this? Because I won't lie, I've used the Pluralsight one. I've also done the live training. It's a lot of information,
Yes,
and no offense, it's not very interesting to me.
really.
Not, I
You've
think
just
the-
broken my heart. Though. It's like,
I think
this
the
is not
initial-
really interesting for me.
You're repeating it, and I'm
Oh, yeah, you didn't expect that. The microphone is on. This is quite boring for me.
when it gets into the actual AI stuff, it would be interesting. But to
Ah,
get
so
there,
it's just my stuff that's not interesting. It's the other stuff.
your stuff is everything, isn't it? It's the DevOps. I saw you had architecture, the actual stuff,
So you find everything boring.
except for the AI.
I'm done with this conversation. I will go and sell insurance after today, you know.
Tips for, like, because obviously it's been challenging, I suppose, but is there anything to observe
You must work on something that you're passionate about. And if you're passionate about AI, focus on AI, right? There's nothing as bad as going like, I want to learn AI and I'm sitting with this IoT thing, you know. Well, it doesn't make sense to do that. So if you find something that you think, shit, I really want to learn about this, and then go learn about that. You know, so you use the Microsoft Learn website. That's probably our go-to. We're replacing all our course material with Microsoft Learn content. So Learn is the way to go. There's some hands-on labs there. Yeah, lots of stuff.
I still have to do the fundamentals.
No, you don't. The fundamentals is an optional certification.
Is it? What
It
about
is.
there was an event and the Microsoft team were giving out like vouchers and stuff, and they said you have the pipeline is the fundamentals, the data fundamentals, then I can do the AI.
Yeah, but hang on for a second. There's a difference between Azure Fundamentals, which is a very broad course, versus there's a difference between Azure Fundamentals and AI Fundamentals, Data Fundamentals. We've got about 12 different fundamentals courses, right? So it might be on data and AI or whatever other areas. It might be that they require the fundamentals to get the further exam, but for an Azure administrator and an Azure developer, you certainly don't need the fundamentals course. It's optional for all the certifications, as far as I'm aware. I can check that for you quickly. Give me a second. I'm going to put this on the screen quickly. Right, I think everyone is more or less back. Good to go. All right, so I have a hello. So I have a question here up front. So, and I probably should be doing this after the fact, but I'm going to do it now quickly and just get it out of the way. If you navigate to akka.ms/learn, right? This is essentially our Learn portal. We are replacing all our content with content on Microsoft Learn. So Microsoft Learn is your go-to place to learn about all our services, right? MA, that's Afrikaans for mother. Maybe it's a subliminal thing. I'm like, missing South Africa. Not really. Okay, so there you can see there I've got certifications, right? Now, the Learn, I can probably spend an hour on the Learn portal, right? Because the Learn portal is really amazing. You'll see there's code samples, there's assessments which will test your knowledge in some of these areas, right? So this is the whole portal. If you're a large organization and your users sign in with their corporate credentials, we can give them an export of your certification progress, how far you are with certain modules, right? So it's a great thing to be messing around with. There you can see the Microsoft certifications. And if you're interested in AI engineer, just as an example, right? Hello. Then you'll see there's a Microsoft certified AI engineer associate, right? If I scroll down here, then it'll show me in order to get the certification, I need to get the designing and implementing a Microsoft Azure AI solution exam, and then I'm certified. If you still needed to get if you needed to do the fundamentals one, there'll be a block in front here that says fundamentals. So to give you an idea, if I just hit the back button here, let's just go backspace, I think. Well, that didn't work. So if I go with, let's just search for DevOps. I spelled that incorrectly. Yeah, there we go. There you can see there's a certification, DevOps engineer. And check this out. It's saying there's one exam that you need to get for that, but prior to that, and it doesn't have to be in the same timeline, I can first write the DevOps exam, and then I either need the Microsoft Administrator exam or I need the Azure Developer exam, right? So if you just go find the certification that you're keen on, it'll tell you which exams it is. Our fundamentals exams are always optional. I'm not aware of any fundamentals exams and certification that's required for any of our other certifications. All right, so that's probably an important point. Okay, other than that, let's crank it up a bit. I'm going to try and go a little bit quicker because I want to get to some demos, right? All right, so we spoke about the structure. I'm going to just quickly waffle through a couple of these. And then we'll continue. This is a picture. It's probably about a year old. It's probably about a year and a half old, actually, right? So we've got a lot more regions than that. In actual fact, Microsoft has got more global regions than our two largest competitors together, right? And if you're an international distributed organization, that should mean a lot to you because it means you can put down data much closer to your users that are compliant, right? So the footprint actually matters if you think about it like that. So there you can see. Now I want you, this is not a test, but it is a little bit. I want you to see if you see some sort of a pattern there. What's the pattern that you see? Do you see that some of them are closer together? This is where if you focus behind it, you will see a dinosaur. I'm just kidding. Sorry, yeah? Correct. You're 100% right. If you take a look at this, you will see that these two seem to be quite close, right? These two seem to be quite close. In fact, you'll find that pattern almost everywhere because we try to create a region that is around 300 miles away from another region so that we can do what's known as a regional pair. Every region inside of Azure is paired with another region. So if the primary region goes down, a secondary region can take over some of the workloads inside that region, okay? So this is how we put together our global Azure infrastructure. We create a new region, and that region usually gets announced with another region, which means it's part of a regional pair. You don't have control over the regional pair. We control the regional pair. So if I create the IoT hub in South Africa North, we will automatically create the IoT hub in South Africa West. So in case Johannesburg goes down, Cape Town will still run your IoT workload. All right. It's known as a regional pair. In South Africa, those two are paired together. You will see that we've got more than one connection between the two as well, right? It's not routing over that it's not routing between those two regions with post pigeons or fax machines. We've got dark fiber running between these, and there's more than one line. So there's redundancy between the two, right? So even if the line goes down between one, the other line can still carry the workload, right? So if I go back here, all the blue lines you see there is our global network, right? We are the second biggest provider of network infrastructure in our oceans today. We've got more dark fiber in the ocean than only one other company has got more dark fiber. So we are building a massive global network here. I think that's quite evident. So our regions are usually paired with a regional pair. Every region has got a regional pair. That's important. Inside of the region, we've got some additional redundancy. It's called zones. AWS has a very similar type of thing, right? So we've got up to 3 zones inside of a region, which means each of these zones are separately powered, has got separate communications, and is actually a complete data center in the same region, even if it is on the same premises. So the entire data center can burn down. There will be another data center right next to that that can still carry the load, right? So we've got regional redundancy, but we've also got some redundancy inside of a region, if that makes sense. All right. So when you provision resources, we will always ask you for the region. Where do you want to put these resources? Think of data compliance there, right? And then we might ask you for the zone if certain resources require zone level redundancy. Is there a question there? I was just clearing the throat. All right. Sorry, I pounced. Okay, so that is essentially the logical architecture. Please don't look at this slide and go, gosh, that's too much for me. It's actually not. Because all you'll see here is that structure that I had on there early on, right? Management groups that has got the hierarchical structure, the subscription, which can only be nested in one level, the resource group, which can only be nested in one level, and the individual resources, right? So that's all I got there. At the top there, we've got geographies. Americas is one geography. Europe is another one. We've got Middle East and Africa, Asia Pacific. We've segregated the world based on 5 regions. And inside those regions, we've got, inside those, the geography, we've got multiple regions. Each of these regions is paired with another region for redundancy. And inside of that region, you might have zones, right? So I just try to put everything onto a single slide so that everything is on a single slide. Okay, any questions around our global infrastructure or around, you know, that logical architecture and structure at the bottom? Yes, ma'am. I will gladly give you a copy of the slides. I'll put them on SlideShare or somewhere there. I made these slides, so I can probably do that, I think. I'm not allowed to share the other slides that I actually use on a daily basis, but these I can share. Let's quickly jog through a couple of the Microsoft Azure services. So first one, identity. Now, again, this is one of the more complicated slides, but I don't want you to think, gosh, you know, this stuff is complicated. It's as complicated as you're going to make of it, right? When you sign up for your first Microsoft Cloud service, we will check to see what your company email address is. And if your company email address is johan@contoso.com, we are going to check in our backend to see if there's a contoso.com organization already. If there is one, your tenant exists. If there isn't one, we will create a tenant, right? And with tenant, I mean an Azure Active Directory tenant, because that's like the cornerstone. Your identity is the cornerstone of all your workloads, actually, all right? So the reason why I put this slide on here is to make you understand that, hey, we've got some on-premises stuff, right? So if you're running Active Directory on-prem, you might be running some applications and services on your local area network in your organization, in your building and data center. We can synchronize your users and groups into Azure AD so that users can authenticate via the cloud and not necessarily authenticate on-prem, right? We can even force the authentication in the cloud to go back to on-prem and then go back to the cloud if we wanted to do that, right? We are synchronizing users and groups with filters, so we don't have to synchronize all the users and groups. We can selectively sync what we want to sync. I'm gonna use this. So you can see there's that synchronization tool that I spoke about, right? It's actually called Microsoft Azure AD Connect is the tool name. And that tool will allow me to select what groups and what users I want to sync. If we synchronize the users, we don't necessarily sync the passwords, right? We synchronize a hash of the password, which is like the password thrown through some algorithm that gives a unique number that will only get generated with that password, right? So we synchronize actually the hash of the hash into the cloud. So we're never storing your password in the cloud, and I think that's quite important. Azure AD allows you to also bring your devices, right? So traditionally, with the Microsoft stack, you might be joining your device to a domain. We can also join our devices to Azure AD so that I can sign onto my laptop with my corporate credentials without having to go into the offices to do that, right? I can just connect it to the cloud and I sign in with my cloud credentials, which actually synchronizes from on-prem. That holds true for Windows 10 plus, but it also holds true for your Apple devices and Android devices, right? Not exactly the same. They can be connected to Azure AD, and we can then hence reset them so that you can get your mail on your device. And then if the device gets lost, we can essentially trash that device so that the person who ran away with your cell phone doesn't get access to your email. You'll also notice I've got this thing there called customers and partners, right? So as someone rightfully mentioned, they want to give the service provider access to manage their resources. So I can actually send a guest invite to someone else, and they can sign on to my Azure environment with a guest credential, right? So the account doesn't necessarily have to live here. We can bring in some guests to also access our environment. And that's true for Azure. I can give them access to Teams. I can give them access to Microsoft 365, SharePoint, calendar sharing, etc. Right? So we've got that component. And then there's some additional identity providers, which will essentially allow me to either use a third-party application and authenticate to that third-party application with Azure AD, or vice versa, right? I can say when I authenticate to Azure AD, send the user off to Google or to Twitter or to Facebook to go and authenticate there. It's all OAuth based. Azure Active Directory is not Active Directory. It's a cloud-based. We built it for the cloud. It's HTTP-based. It's not built on the same protocols that we built Active Directory for Windows. All our other cloud services piggybacks off Azure AD. So if you're using Microsoft 365, it's using Azure AD. If you are using Dynamics 365, which is like a CRM system, it's using Azure AD. If you're using Azure, you are using Azure AD, but Azure Active Directory is not really part of Azure per se, right? It's just got the same name. And then there's a whole bunch of additional features here that you will see that will blow the hair back of any administrator. Things like conditional access. So if someone accesses the Azure Portal and they are not on our local area network at the office, prompt them for multi-factor authentication so they have to use their phone, right? So that's called conditional access. We've got a whole bunch of additional things. Multi-factor authentication, right? The ability to use your mobile phone, right? We are driving towards passwordless authentication so people don't have to remember passwords, so they can look at their phone, sign in, and have a nice day. In fact, we've also got a password self-reset portal so that your users can reset their password via their cell phone without your administrator having to lift a finger, right? So all of that is baked in there. We've got sort of access management, privileged identity management that will allow you to, at a high level, it'll allow you to evaluate on an ongoing basis if users should be part of groups, right? So if I make you part of a group for marketing, it'll prompt me at the end of the month, do you still want to be part of this group? Should you be part of this group, right? And it'll do that life cycle management, if you like. And then there's identity protection, which just at a high level allows us to even deploy agents to your on-premises Active Directory, and we can then do some pretty cool stuff. Like, for example, if someone signs in from Australia and 20 minutes later they sign in from Brazil, it's not possible to do that, right? And there's like a time travel machine type scenario, which is not really possible. So we can pick up on that and we can say, hey, this is a high risk sign-in. And then we can have some rules that says, if it's a high-risk sign-in, then prompt the user for multi-factor authentication or whatever other rules you might have. All right, so I hope that makes sense. That was a really quick jog. We spent about a half a day on this in our administrator course. So just at a high level. The next option, storage accounts. I think someone here has got some questions around this for storage accounts. I think it was you, sir. Anyway, I'll field questions later on if you want. I'm going to quickly cover some content if it's all the same to you. So when I create a new storage account, and I'm going to create one quickly. In fact, I've got one already. Let me not go and There's my storage accounts. I've got 2 at this point in time. Someone already used the always on name, so I had to create what's called never on. You have no idea. I had sleepless nights about doing that. So there's my storage account. I want you to notice that there's a couple of things there. There's containers, there's file shares, queues, and tables, right? I'm going to quickly just chat through them and what they are, right? In order to do that, let me just see if I've got. There's this thing called the storage browser, and I can either use integrated Azure AD authentication, so I must sign in with my account to access the storage account, or I can sign in with something else, a key, a name. I can even use like a type of token if I want. So if you were programmatically accessing a storage account, you will probably add something like a connection string into your application, and that'll give you access to the storage account, right? So you can see there I'm going to quickly go through them. Tables, right? Some of you might have heard of NoSQL, right? NoSQL is essentially a key value pair type data structure which allows me to store non-relational data, right? So if I create a new table, then you will see that I don't have any tables right now. There's a couple of system tables. I didn't create these. I'm going to click on add a table, and I'm going to say that this is my website table. In fact, let's just call it website for now. I'll hit the OK button, and there's my website table. And you'll see from there that I can go and add an entity. Entity is really just a line item, right? So I can click on add entity, and there you can see there's my partition key and my row key. So I can say the partition key is A and the row key is this, and then I can start adding some properties, right? So this is really just a key value pair type data structure, and I can store it in Azure storage accounts. It's really, really cheap. There's no processing that happens in the backend here. So it's not a database, right? No stored procedures or funny stuff like that. It's really just a REST-based interface with key value pairs that I can store data and retrieve the data, right? Simple store and retrieve type key value pair data, right? So that's the one item, tables. The other item we've got in here is queues. Now, queues are a bit of a different beast. Queues are generally used for what's known as load leveling. And with load leveling, what we're actually doing is we're saying, like, let's say I've got 1,000 point of sale systems, right? So systems that someone is standing and they've got people buying stuff and it posts transactions to something like SAP or some financial system in the background. I can use keys to ensure that my backend system is not overloaded. So I'm sending messages into the queue, and then my application can read those messages off the queue, all right? So that gives me a very scalable bulk read sort of batch processing type capability, all right? So that's what queues are for. Don't worry about the details. As long as you remember, hey, there was queues. That's all you have to do right now. If you want to get into more details, jump onto the course next week, and we will start piecemeal working through each of these services so you can get a little bit more details. The other one is file shares. So most of you should know what a file share is. There you can see, in actual fact, I'm going to demo this from here. There's my file share. I'm not going to use the browser for that. The storage browser, I mean. There's a file share. Let's call this one invoices, right? So the manager said, hey, we must create a file share where the salespeople can store invoices. And that's all I've done here. There you can see invoices, and you can see if I click on connect, then there's the command. If I say show script there, then this is the command that will allow me to map a network drive to that location. And now I can have my Z drive is pointing to file shares, okay? So we also use this for containerized applications, because containerized applications should not use any local state. So I've got 5 maybe containerized applications, and they mount that shared location, and that's where they store their state. Okay, so that's file shares. By the way, file shares also give me the option of creating a snapshot, and I can then do a granular restore from that. So it gives me almost like a backup capability as well. Yes, sir. It is, you're 100% right. It's a SMB file share, SMB 3.0 and plus. But yeah, it's connected to the internet. You can. I would not recommend that. It's not going to work well for Windows 10 devices. The more likely pattern, just check my time, the more likely pattern will be for virtual machines inside the Azure environment that needs some file share, is for them to map the drive. I've noticed if I map the drive from my Windows device, it makes my Explorer quite slow, because Explorer is constantly trying to enumerate those files, and if my internet connection is bad, it's going to make the machine slow. So it's not a great solution for end user file shares, but it is a good solution for a server-based sort of file share scenario where you've got an application that generates files somewhere and you don't want those files on the local disk. All right. Yeah, okay, file shares. So all of this is inside of a storage account, right? And you're actually only paying for what you are using with the storage account. Keep in mind that there's no server-side processing here. And then the last one is called containers. Now, I know this is quite confusing, actually, because the minute I say the word container, everyone is thinking Docker, right? Now, I don't want you to think Docker. I want you to think of a container as a cloud volume per se. All right, so think about it like this. I'm gonna create a new container here, right? Who of you know what static web applications are? Static web application, right? The application that doesn't require server-side processing. So think just HTML and JavaScript and CSS, all right? I can store those in here, and you'll notice that if I go and say the name for this one is going to be website 1, just running out of names here, and I'm going to make this anonymous access, right? So I don't have to authenticate to this, which is not secure, but for your public website, that might be ideal, right? So I'm going to hit the create button here, and it creates, you know, that thing for me. I'm going to click on the upload button, and I'm going to select some files from my desktop here. There's index.html and I think image.png. It's like a just little static HTML page that I created. I'm going to upload them, and the files are in there now. And if I go for index here now, then you'll see I can go and copy that URL to the clipboard. And if I go for an in private browser window and paste it there, there's my static web application running from the storage account. And I want you to notice at the top there, oopsie, Control 2, that it's taken my storage account name .blob.core.windows.net, the name of my container, and all my files sit underneath that, right? So what do? If your marketing organization or department has got thousands of videos, don't put them in your web application, put them in a storage account and just reference them from here. It's cheap storage, it's fast, it's HTTP access to static content, okay? So anything that doesn't need to execute HTML, JavaScript, CSS, JPEGs, videos, PDFs, large files of any sort, shove them into the storage account containers. That's where you can actually use them. All right, so another example and another reason why you want to use those storage accounts is because we can tear them down, right? So what we can do is we can actually go and we can say, for lifecycle management, what we want to do is if one of these, I'm running out of low on time here, so I'm just going to hit next here. So we can say that, look, if a blob has not been modified in 10 days, delete the blob, right? So I get some life cycle management on these blobs as well, which allows me to, for example, upload invoices for my customer, and they've got 7 days to download the invoice. After those 7 days, I can expire the link if I wanted to, and I can delete the blob from the environment, right? So your environment doesn't just get more and more blobs uploaded. Over time, it should level down a little bit, right? So I've got some sort of, life cycle management around that as well. Okay, so that's storage accounts. I'm not going to go into much more detail. We spend about a half a day on that in all our courses. So there really is a lot there. Okay, so blobs, files, tables, and queues, all of these make part of our storage accounts. And all of this is essentially created on our distributed sort of storage platform, and even our virtual machine disks live on these storage accounts. A blob lives in a container, yes. Yeah. And in fact, there's different types of storage account types. You can get this from our website as well. And as far as the blobs is concerned that you just spoke about, don't worry about all the rest there. We don't have time for that, actually. Really? I'm not sure. A blob. You're thinking of something related to Star Wars, I'm sure, right? Something that's busy calling the orders. Anyway, interesting. Okay, so these are the types of blobs that we can store in there. We can store what's known as a block blob. We can store append blobs, which is essentially log files, and we can store page blobs, which is essentially virtual machine blobs. Okay, so if you want to start migrating your virtual machines from on-prem into the cloud, take your VHD files, upload them as page blobs, and we can then mount your virtual machines from those blobs on the, on the storage account. Okay, it's one way of doing it. All right, next, I'm going to jog through these quickly. What's the time here? 7:30. Okay, 15 minutes, my word. I think I spent too much time, trying to be Picasso there. So virtual networks. You cannot create virtual machines if you don't have a virtual network. So the planning that goes into virtual networks should be very similar to the planning that you do when you're planning networks on premises, right? How many nodes should be on the network? How many, how does that look in now? How does that look in 5 years' time, right? So your IP address ranging and CIDR sort of the way that you assign your IP addresses, all that thinking that you do on-prem should also be taken to the cloud. I'm going to quickly do a demo of that as well. I've got some virtual networks here. I'm just going to type the word VNet, and there you can see there's some virtual networks. I've got a couple of them. There's one, and you'll see that this virtual network has got, there's the address space for the virtual network. If you're not into IP addresses, then this is going to probably be dead boring for you. I know everything is dead boring for you already. And I think we've got that recorded on the internet, by the way. I'm just pulling a leg. It's just on YouTube. And then you'll notice it shows me the connected devices on that virtual network and the, all the different subnets, because I can take a virtual network and I can create further subnets in that virtual network, all right? By default, all the virtual machines on a virtual network can communicate with one another, but I have to do some fancy footwork if I want to get virtual machines in different VNets to talk to one another, all right? That's a little bit more tricky. I have to create what's known as a peering. Right, so enough of that. There you can see, because I draw like a crab, I just use this slide. There you can see my virtual machine sits on the virtual network or sits on the subnet in the virtual network, and it's connected to that subnet using a network interface card. That, of course, is a virtual network interface card, right? It's not a physical network interface card that you might plug into a PC. And we can also connect the virtual network to on-prem, right? So we can create a hybrid scenario whereby you're either using a VPN connection from on-premises into the Azure Virtual Network, or you can use something called Express Route, where you might have a service provider that is building something like a dedicated MPLS network from your data center directly into our data center, right? Probably a little bit more expensive. I cannot really see, the corner shop doing that if they were running just one virtual machine type scenario. All right, and then there's virtual machines. I'm going to just quickly touch on a couple of these. Virtual machines comes with different SLAs, right? So I've got a standard virtual machine that has got premium storage, and I'll demo one of that for you, which has got a 99.9% SLA, right? Then I can place the virtual machines in what is known as an availability set. In an availability set, I choose one or more racks, and I choose one or more physical hosts. And this means that if the rack goes down, there's another rack that's running my virtual machine, right? So we give you that disaster recovery type scenario, and that bumps it up to 99.95%. And then if you remember from the global Azure network that I spoke about earlier on, we had those 3 zones inside of a region. I can distribute my virtual machines across different zones inside a region, and that means if virtual machine 1 is in zone 1 and VM2 is in zone 2, if zone 1 goes down, virtual machine 2 will still be running in zone 2, if that makes sense, right? So we just have some redundancy, and that bumps it up to 99.9% of the time, right? Which should be sufficient for most of what your workload requirements are. And then last but not least, we've got virtual machine scale sets. This is what you spoke about earlier on. Virtual machine scale sets is essentially a cluster of servers, right? So all these virtual machines look exactly the same, and based on my rules that I've got, it can scale from only have a single virtual machine to scale up to 900 virtual machines, right? And I can place that in front of a load balancer to get sort of load balanced across those virtual machines, right? Virtual machine scale sets. Right, I'm going to see if I can quickly demo aspects of that. I've already created a virtual machine here. I've got a couple of them. There's my virtual machines. And you'll notice that, if I click on VM1 here, then you will see that, hey, there's, the networking. I can connect to the virtual machine. RDP for Windows typically, SSH for Linux virtual machines. For both of those, the virtual machine needs a public-facing IP address, which is going to cost you a little bit more. But you can also create something called Bastion, and Bastion is going to give you access to your virtual machine in the Azure Portal without having a public IP address. So that tends to be a lot more secure than having an IP address with the open port on the internet, right? Okay, so and then you'll see a bunch of things. There's disks. If I want to add like a data disk, I can essentially, add a data disk if I wanted to. There you can see I can create and attach a new disk, add an existing disk if I wanted to. Virtual machines, right? Extensions. I can from a configuration perspective, I can do certain things. I can do like an auto shutdown. This is important for development purposes. If your developers work from 9 to 5 and then the manager kicks them out the door, I know that really doesn't ever happen like that. But in a worst case scenario, your developers are likely not working after 12 o'clock unless something has really gone wrong, right? So then shut down your virtual machines that you are using for development every night at 12 o'clock, and you will save a little bit of cost. Cost for virtual machines are split into 2 parts. You've got cost relating to the running of the virtual machine, and you've got the cost related to the storage that the virtual machine is taking. If I go to the top here, hey, where's my cursor now? If I go to the top here and I click on Overview, then you'll see I can stop the virtual machine. So when I stop the virtual machine, I stop paying for the running cost of the virtual machine, which is most of the cost actually, and I'm only paying now for the storage that it's taking. All right. So for production workloads that need to be running 24/7, you probably won't do that. But for things like UAT, where you might be doing UAT testing once a month, switch them off when you don't need them. Developer workloads, switch them off when you don't need them, right? So great way of saving some money there. All right, please stop me if you have questions. I know I'm cruising through this now, and it probably is a lot of information if you are new to the platform. Yeah, I mentioned those virtual machines connections already. I see some of you are taking sort of photos. You're welcome to take. I will share the slides afterwards, so don't worry about that. But there you can see, connecting to your virtual machine in Azure. You can use RDP for Windows. You can use SSH for Linux, but you can also use that Bastion interface, which gives you access via the browser, and you don't need to, have those ports open. So that is some of the infrastructure as a service that we spoke about. I'm briefly going to touch on some PaaS services, right? So moving away from infrastructure, giving Microsoft a little bit more management capability on your infrastructure. And some of those include app service plans, app services, and then we've got deployment slots. These are for web apps. It's easier to demo this, right? So what I've got here is missing cursor. I'm going to type the word app here, and I'm going to go for app services. So what I've got here is I've got a little vanilla .NET application. And you will see that my .NET application has got a URL, right? This is the production website. This is just a .NET application that I've shoved in there. The source code for this is available for you on GitHub as well. If you wanted to, I will put that inside the PowerPoint before I share it. So you can actually play around with this. So there you can see that I've got things like a deployment center, right? If you are not into DevOps and you want to just automate the deployment of your application without, using something like Azure DevOps or GitHub for that matter, then what we can very easily do is we can say, hey, my code is in GitHub, right? What solution? What is it? And then we will go and build out the CI/CD pipeline, shove it into GitHub Actions, and it'll pull your application and start running your application in this app service plan without you moving a finger. And you can then choose what is going to trigger that publishing of your application, right? So if I make a change to the master branch, if I make a change to the dev branch, publish the application, and then do that automatic deployment, right? So there's some CI/CD capability sort of baked in here. And then there's some other features. You will see that I've got some configuration management, right? So for example, if you just give me a moment here, this thing is taking its sweet time. But if I, for example, just wait for configuration to load, while that's busy loading, I'm going to click on authentication. I'm going to talk through some of the other ones, right? Authentication. Shucks, now it's loaded. So there you can see that's the color, right? I can actually go and say that, don't laugh, lemon chiffon. This is a thing, right? Hit the save button here. And because this application that I built is reading some of those environmental variables, if I hit the refresh button here, it should come back in a few seconds with a terrible lemon chiffon background. One of the demos is supposed to fail. I planned that. I wish I could say that. There we go. That's lemon chiffon. All right. So whether it is silly colors like that describes my app, or whether it's a database connection that pulls, shows me what my database is connected to, the connection string for that, I can store those configuration values in the app configuration, and I can move them out of my configuration files and out of my application as a whole. All right, so app services, great way. App services can also run containerized applications, right? So if you've got Docker apps, you can run those Docker applications in app services. Okay. Then on top of that, I've got what's known as deployment slots. So take a look here. It's like a commentator's curse. Here we go. There you can see I can create some additional slots, right? And what this means is I can specify the different environments, like my dev environment, my testing environment, my UAT environment, a staging environment of sorts. And that gives each of those their own URL. And when I'm ready to deploy, all I have to do is click on the swap button, and I swap that slot with that slot, and that takes my application from UAT into production. So it's like a zero downtime type deployment that I can create here. Okay. All right, I'm not going to spend too much time around that. We covered that quickly. Just by the way, you will also see all of this is also online, and so you don't have to worry now about getting all of this. We've got different tiers for this. So there's a shared tier where your application will be shared with other tenants for dev workloads. And then we've got a dedicated tier that the infrastructure and the virtual machines that are running your web apps are just for you and won't be shared with any other customers of ours. And then there's also an isolated tier, but this will show you, the auto scale deployment slots. And if I go back to my app service plan here, you will see that if I go to scale out, I can actually go for auto scale, and check this out. I've got this option that says when the CPU is over 70% for 10 minutes, add another instance or virtual machine into the cluster. and it'll scale out like that. And if the CPU is less than 30%, remove one of the instances out of the cluster. So my cluster is automatically scaling in and out based on the load on my environment. Okay, that's what's known as elasticity in the cloud. My voice is starting to take a hiding here because I haven't spoken so much in a long time. These are essentially a list of all the types of apps you can run in app services. So this is probably your starting point in Azure. Start playing with app services, PHP, Java, all of them, have got access to those configuration, to those different slots I spoke about, etc. I actually don't have time to go through the rest here, right? So come for the 10 Tuesdays and we will go through those in a lot more detail. Azure Container Instances, the ability for me to create a container application by just pointing it to the container registry, and I can create the instance of my containerized application, right? So if you're not familiar with containers, we will spend some time on containerized applications. So using something like Docker, right? And if you maybe spend 2 minutes just explaining the differences. If you've got a virtual machine has got its own operating system that you have to manage, right? And a virtual machine sits on top of hardware. So the virtual machine runs because there's a hypervisor that simulates the hardware, right? With containerized applications, it's almost like I'm simulating the operating system. So I can have a single host operating system or VM, and that can be running multiple instances of your application, right? So think about this. One VM, 10 instances of your application running on that VM. Whereas if you're using the native sort of way that we're running applications, you typically only have one instance of the application running on each VM, which means you got 10 VMs to get 10 instances of your application, right? So it's just a way to give us some additional scale. I'm actually not going to bother too much with all the rest of the slides here. I'm going to quickly skip here into the Azure Monitor tool. So the Azure Monitor tool is essentially a mechanism for us to monitor our solutions. You will see that we've got all sorts of sources here. I've got 3 minutes left here. Really milking it now. We've got applications, operating systems, all sorts of Azure resources, the Azure subscriptions, all of these things feeds into the Azure Monitor so that I can monitor my applications, right? And that allows me to even bring custom sources. So if I had time, would have shown you a demo of a little app I've got running locally, and I've used this app to send information into the Azure Monitor so I can go and query that data later on. All right. So the Azure Monitor is essentially that. I'm going to quickly do a demo of the Azure Monitor. There you can see there's the Azure Monitor. And there you can see there's stuff like metrics, right? So I'm going to close that down, but you can see there, right? What was the virtual machine CPU over time? How much memory was there over time? So we've got metrics in there, and then we've also got logs in there. And logs is essentially a mechanism for you to be querying the raw data that's been generated. Any log files, right? You can bring your own log files and shove them in there and query them using this query tool that I've got in here, right? And then you'll see if I go a little bit lower here, you'll see that there's service health, right? What are current issues that I'm experiencing with all my workloads in Azure? So it's a centralized portal that I can see where things are going wrong right now. Also, where Microsoft is planning some maintenance and some health advisories, which will essentially give you some hey, if you want to do this better, if you want a more secure environment, do this, do that, right? So we've got a hell of a lot of Azure advisors. I was also an Azure blockchain advisor before I joined Microsoft, whereby there's actually people behind the scenes that are saying, well, if we do this better, and if we do it like that, then our customers will be more secure. So the advisor stuff you're seeing in the Azure portal is from people doing the math and saying, well, if you configure your service like this, it's bound to be more secure, it's bound to cost you less, it's bound to be more practical and more scalable and whatever else, right? Okay, so that is just my service health And then if I drill down a section, you'll see that there's things like app insights. And if I go for my application insights here, and I go for the application map, then it will show me all my different instances. There you can see that is my instance, and you can see that there is, the application. If there's a poor performance issue, I can actually drill down and then start investigating that performance. You can see I can zoom in on some of these items, and down there you will see that, hey, this was a GET request. That's how long the GET request took. So the Azure Monitor gives me very sort of detailed level instrumentation for your applications that allows you to understand what is going wrong, what is going right for that matter, right? Where do you need some attention in your application? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is essentially the end of my demos here. I've got one more slide there, and that's that. Gosh. Very close. So what have we covered? We covered why the cloud. We covered some governance components. We went through a whole bunch of things: identity, infrastructure, platform, and software as a service. I did not demo that. Sorry about that. If you want to stick around afterwards, maybe I can demo that. And then we spoke about monitoring towards the end. On the right-hand side, I've got some links that you can follow that will essentially show you where you can get some additional learning and some additional information on top of all of this. And that is not akka.me, it's akka.ms, right? And you can see there, akka.ms/learn will take you to that Learn portal I showed you initially. And you can also, if your organization is certain organizations are part of the ESI program, that's the program I work for, you get your training for free through the ESI program, right? So you don't have to go and pay some training provider to get your training. You will have Microsoft certified trainers like myself training you every week if you want to sit every week and go through some training, right? esi.microsoft.com. See if you are eligible there to get your training for free. And then last but not least, if you are interested in doing some labs around Azure Developer, and this is also true for the AI stuff if you don't care for the other stuff, right? So you'll see if I go to the following URL, akka.ms/AI 900 labs. I think that should work. That's a bad example. Let's go with the developer one, akka.ms/AZ204 labs. This is the developer course, right? Then you'll see that we've got some hands-on labs there that you can go and work through all of these. How to implement Azure functions. So, you've got all these, step-by-step instructions on how to build out all of these. And if you know the course codes, right, which you can find on the Microsoft Learn site, most of our courses, labs are available like this. So if you want to do some of the labs for the administrator course, the administrator course is AZ104. You can find that online. All you have to do is essentially, go akka.ms/AZ104 labs. It'll take you to the GitHub labs. Other than that, I have to thank you for putting up with me, and I will see if there are any additional questions. Please.
On Tuesday, what time and how long?
Sorry,
Sorry.
what was the question?
On Tuesday, how long?
It's an hour-long workshop, virtual, at 6 o'clock in the evening. I have a question from our virtual audience.
Yes, please.
They ask, how do you interpret the insights you monitor?
How do you integrate the insight?
Interpret.
How do you interpret?
Yeah.
So the data inside of the Azure Monitor is available in logs, and you can query that using a special language called the Custo query language, right? So the Custo query language is very similar to a SQL type language, where I can literally say, select this from that, do a join on the data, and show it in a table or show it in a graph. So there's a specified query language that will allow you to query that data. I hope that answers that question.
Okay, thank you
All
so
right.
much. I think we have a question
sir.
from the audience.
Was a reference to persistent disk.
Yes.
Okay, because you just mentioned that because you want to save some money, shut out the developers out and shut out the block services.
Yes.
Now, what happens to that data in transit? It gets lost once you shut it down.
What do you mean in transit? If it's a virtual machine, that it's not in transit, it's stuck on a disk somewhere, right?
So is persistent is the reference to persistence something to do with the ephemeral nature of containers?
No, it depends. That means it depends. That's a contextual question. So for containers, persistent disks mean something other than for virtual machines. For virtual machines, a persistent disk might mean something different. So for containers in Kubernetes, for example, I can have what's known as persistent storage, and that gives me, a shared space where all my containerized applications can share their state. But for virtual machines, that essentially means it's a physical VHD file that sits somewhere on a disk. Okay, so it's never in transit, really. That's a pleasure. I hope that answered your question. Some more questions? Not you. So I haven't done it yet, but I'll put it in SlideShare.
Oh, no, sorry, the presentation I sent.
Oh, shucks. Yes. Oh, sorry, man. Sorry, I forgot about that. Thank you very much. I hope I haven't put everyone off Azure here.
Just before you leave, we have a Cloud Skills Challenge, which will be starting at 9 p.m. today. I'm just going to get Johan to put it on the screen for everyone. For the virtual audience, it should be up on the screen already. So you can scan the QR code and it'll take you into the Cloud Skills Challenge, which is just an extra additional learning for you basically on Azure. And the next the next session here in association with Coding Black Females is on the 22nd of February. In that, we'll be talking all about Azure AI. So if you're around, please do come, and we obviously will be running it hybrid.
Yeah, you can drive.
This QR. So it's this QR code. Yeah, that's the QR code. So feel free to scan it, or you can use the link which is aka.ms/afb1. Yeah, and finish the Cloud Skills Challenge. Be a part of it. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming on this cold day. And yeah, we'll see you on the 22nd of February. And don't forget, 10 Tuesdays starts from next Tuesday. All right, thanks very much.